Welcome to the DVB newsroom. I am Myat. In our studio today is Jane Ferguson, Associate Professor of Anthropology and Southeast Asian History at Australian National University. She is a researcher of Myanmar, Shan and Time. Today we're going to talk about her second book, Silver Screens and Golden Dreams, Social History of Burmese Cinema. Hello Jane, welcome to the DVB newsroom.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, I would like to ask you a question about your recent book, Silver Screens and Golden Dreams. Why are you interested in doing research about Myanmar film history?
Well, thanks for the question. Actually, I'm not really a film scholar. I started to write the book because 20 years ago, when I was starting my dissertation research in a Shan village in 2004 to 2007, my dissertation was in cultural anthropology. So I was interested in people's everyday lives and personal memories. And they told me so many stories about the film industry that they enjoyed so much as kids in the Shan state or in Mandalay or Yangon. They had happy memories of the movies that they loved and the stars that they used to follow. So the old movies, they still had impact in the early 2000s. They didn't like it, for example, that the bad guys would always be wearing Shan pants. But I started to notice that foreign researchers hadn't studied this large industry, so I started to take an interest in the stories myself.
So I understand that you have written Myanmar's political and social history based on film history. So what is the relationship between film history and social and political history in Myanmar?
It's not just focusing on film history as in the films and who made the films and what the stories are about. It's also about what kind of themes in history can we learn about by studying the film industry and its impact on society. So first of all, I ask, how do you think about a film? It's not just a work of art, but it's also a capitalist commodity. So in order to understand the context for the film, you have to study the politics, you have to study the society, you have to study the economy as well, the broader political economy. So in that sense, popular culture as the mainstream, it both reflects society's values, but then on the opposite side, it can influence society and its ideas about mainstream popular culture. So I think about popular culture and film and its important role in Myanmar as kind of a window into everyday life in Myanmar through this period.
How long it took you to do research, write this book, and how many times? Did you go to Yangon or any other place of the country? And what are the challenges you find?
I can't count anymore. The first time I went to Myanmar was in 1998, and I've been learning about it very gradually. It hadn't been the only focus of my research. I wrote another book about Shan, Thai, and Burmese history, and I've written articles, and I also have to keep teaching in order to keep my salary as a university instructor, so I haven't been focusing 100% of my energy on film history. But the first challenge for doing research is there isn't a systematic film archive of all of the films that were made between 1920 and 1980. I calculated that there were about 2,600 films that made it to the cinema in Burma between 1920 and 1980. And today, only about 400 of them survive because of the effort of Myanmar TV in order to make magnetic tapes. That was a challenge to find the films to look at. But through friends and contacts, so many friends were so encouraging. I did a lot of interviews with movie industry insiders, as well as film hobbyists, and then also on the used book markets. I was able to buy a lot of old books, history books about Burmese cinema, and especially old magazines. There's so many old magazines about Burmese film, and that was very useful for learning about these films that I wasn't able to watch myself.
So do you think this Burmese film and cinema represents Burmese culture identity? What does it represent? Yeah.
Oh, that's a difficult question, because it's easy to talk about a national film industry in terms of its borders or its state regulation. But what makes it culturally Burmese? That would be a very complicated question to answer, because do you look at folklore, or do you look at modernity? Do you look at ethnic majority or ethnic minority? What does it mean? I structured the book to engage that question. How Burmese is it? I also look at Burmese remakes of Hollywood films as a way to look at how did the Burmese film industry change these. So I don't have a perfect answer for what makes it Burmese identity, even though there are a lot of Burmese nationalists who would be very proud about looking at ancient folk tales such as Sangdoshin, the Burmese harpist, as an example of Burmese music, even though it's a Mon folk tale and they're using a Burmese harp, not a Mon Mijang crocodile harp. So it's a controversial issue. So I don't give a right or a wrong answer. I just try to open it for discussion using the evidence from the film industry.
And also you mentioned on women in film industry too. How are women involved in Burmese film industry? So what is their role there?
Yeah, that's in some ways it's similar to the last question. If you look at Burmese film history books, you'll see information about the great Sayaji directors, the original stars. You see a film history that seems to be dominated by Bama men. But social history is useful because it takes apart that image. In some ways, film history books, especially film history books that were produced during the socialist era, reflect a nationalist approach to history. And in other words, film history becomes shoehorned to fit this nationalist narrative. But with social history, it starts to uncover a different kind of story, because the women were a large part of film audiences. So women had consumer power. That had a role to steer the film industry. There were also women writers, women script writers. Many of the most popular films were based on novels that had been written by women. And for one additional example, that the Burmese film industry in the colonial period was connected to Indian cinema, very much so. Their industries cooperated. A lot of the original cinema halls were owned by Indian entrepreneurs. But the early Indian cinema, there was a taboo for high-class women to appear in films. So the first Indian film had a man playing the woman's part, and other Indian films either had low-status women, either prostitutes or Eurasians, playing the women's part. But Burmese film did not have this taboo, did not have this problem. They had high-class women stars from the beginning. It was still, and a lot of the women stars in early Burmese film industry were from theater, from Zapwe or Anyen. So there's lots of ways to look at gender and social history by examining the film industry as a whole in Burma.
You also mentioned Myanmar film portrays stereotypes of ethnic people, like you said about Luzo and Shambao music.
Yeah.
There's a kind of symbol in the film we usually see. And what does that mean for Burmese social history, like portraying ethnic people and producing kind of stereotypes?
It's a fascinating aspect, because whenever you have a mainstream media representation of a group that's politically marginalized, that representation is going to have political meaning. It's because the audiences, depending on what they see, they'll see it as political. Whether it's sympathetic or problematic, it depends on how the audiences see it. So in Burmese film history, like the example of Soundoshin, taking the Mon folktale and then making it into a Bama movie, some Mon people might disagree with that representation or see it as Bama culture taking over. But there might be some other people who would disagree with that interpretation and say, look, it's making our story famous. At the beginning of the film, they have all of the Mon names, even though in the Burmese film, they call it Talang instead of Mon. So again, it's how does the audience see it? And there were some Burmese film directors, for example, director Myat, who made an effort to go to ethnic minority areas and work with ethnic minority people in order to tell those stories so that they would still have space and that it wouldn't be just a 100% Bama-dominated screen. But again, sometimes there have been controversies in history, and it's because of this film opening up these questions to think about history in a new way. We get to see how people were interpreting these questions in the past as well.
Film is just an entertainment business, but entertainment, as you said, entertainment as well as a product.
A capitalist product.
A capitalist product, yeah. So film is being used by the businessmen to make profit.
Sure, yeah.
And also some politicians and governments use film as a medium to spread propaganda. So, so what does it mean? I mean, film as an entertainment, and it's related to other business and political and social issues in Myanmar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough question because it's actually studying, talking about pop culture. It's talking about the cultural mainstream. These are the dominant values that the film industry both reflects and it also influences. And in some ways, of course, those can be problematic. They make a huge profit. They make rich people richer. They, whoever has political power often has access to mainstream media. But then on the other hand, there's thinking about the role of pop culture and entertainment. I admit that sometimes when I'm frustrated with work, I just want to go home and watch some stupid comedy videos on YouTube and laugh at kittens smelling durian and finding that as a role of just for some kind of release or some kind of escape. And you have to admit that when people are going through tough times, that comedy and laughing is an important part of life and an important part of being human. And to ignore that, it ignores a huge part of society. And many of my friends from Myanmar have even, have encouraged me about doing this project because they see a lot of foreign researchers only studying political problems or people suffering, that there's more to life in the country. But in any case, returning to your question, that in order to do a social history of the country, or of any place for that matter, it's important to, take on board, the politics, economics, culture, and, having fun. What people laugh at is a huge part of that. And if we're going to think about, as well, about the political and cultural future, and organize for a new kind of society, thinking of the social history of film as both art and commodity, has evidence of these other aspects of society that just political problems fails to address.
Well, thank you so much for your in-depth knowledge about Myanmar film industry with our DVB audience. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.